Part 1.
You'll hear a lecturer talking to students about the museum service. First, you have some time to look at questions 1 to 3. Now listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 3.
Good afternoon. So far, in these lectures, we've been looking at the management of public services and the ways in which they try to improve. Today, I want to look at the museum service, since it's a very good example of the kind of service that everyone says they want, in theory, but which in practice often has to work with limited budgets. The key aim of most museums today is to make themselves more effective. In the past, a museum might simply collect and organize old objects and display them in glass cabinets. Often, these displays didn't change from one year to the next and simply got bigger as the museum bought more exhibits. However, falling numbers of visits to museums taught managers that bigger wasn't necessarily better and that museums had to adapt to deal with a changing world. Museums have learned that they need to offer a greater variety of services for people in their local area to choose between. They also need to reach as wide an audience as possible and need to find innovative ways of getting people through the door who we perhaps wouldn't think of as traditional museum visitors, children, for example, or people from various ethnic backgrounds. Museum managers often don't have the funding to do very much about the buildings they manage, but they can do a lot about the experience of visiting those buildings. A lot depends on the staff, of course, however big or small the team running the museum may be. But there are also relationships outside the museum which have a large effect. Rather than work alone, good museums these days work very closely with local councils and businesses.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 4 to 10. Now listen and answer questions 4 to 10.
These relationships can be quite complicated, and it's important to understand the different responsibilities. Most museums find that there are things that are the direct responsibility of staff, such as planning and designing new public displays, and there are things that they need outside help for. I'd like to go on to consider some of these areas. Museums have for a long time complained of a lack of funding. They're often not at the top of the list when it comes to local councils deciding what to do with their money. This has led to museums seeking alternative sources, and the local business community has been a valuable partner. More often than not these days, you'll see that an exhibition is sponsored by a business that has some connection to the subject. Their logo will appear on any promotional material that the museum produces to advertise its events, such as leaflets and ads in the local press. Museums also can't afford to see themselves in isolation from the local community, and that obviously involves knowing exactly who the local community is. In most museums, the staff themselves will come from the town or city where the museum is located and should have some knowledge of the needs of local people. However, they will usually rely heavily on studies done by the local council, which tell them what people want from their museum service. Once they have that information, it's then up to the staff to decide how they're going to get the people of the area more involved in the museum, either as visitors or even possibly as volunteers. Apart from the exhibitions, museums provide a whole range of activities, including things like talks or workshops on subjects that local people may be interested in. The museum staff probably lack the expertise to talk on many subjects, and so it usually means inviting speakers from different places, possibly even from different countries. This is exactly the kind of thing that museums will try to do in partnership with companies from the local area, who are often willing to pay for speakers if their brand name is displayed at the event. Museums, of course, need various well-maintained buildings. It's important that people can access the museum services easily and comfortably, and it will usually be the local authorities who are responsible for that. This funding is, of course, ultimately provided by local people through their taxes.
That is the end of part 1.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 2.
Part 2. Listen to the news report about a robbery and then complete the notes from the detective's notebook.
First, you have some time to look at questions 11 to 17. Now, listen carefully and answer questions 11 to 17.
There has been an armed robbery this morning at the Halifax Building Society's branch in Edward Street. John Brinks is at the scene with Detective Sergeant Henry Lawson.
Detective Sergeant, can you tell us what you know about the robbery?
Yes, the raid took place this morning shortly after 11:30 when a man accompanied by a woman went into the offices of the building society and asked to see the manager. There were no other customers in the building at the time. They were let into the manager's office and the woman produced a gun from her handbag. Then they took the manager back out of his office and made him tell the cashiers to hand over all the money they had in the tills and in the safe. It came to about $25,000.
Presumably, you have a number of witnesses.
Yes, we have a good description of both of them. The man was about 1 meter 80 centimeters, around 35 years of age, with blue eyes and short, curly red or ginger hair. He was wearing jeans, a green sweater, and a 3/4 length blue coat. When he spoke to the cashier when he came in, he called himself Mr. Erickson, but we doubt whether that is his real name. But we do know that may be his real name. He also spoke with a strong Scottish accent, which may help us to trace him.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 18 to 20. Now listen and answer questions 18 to 20.
And what about the woman?
Now, she is in her early 20s, slim and quite tall, about 1 metre 70 centimetres. She was wearing a long white raincoat, which was quite loose-fitting, and which she didn't take off. She had a beige handbag, which they used to hide the gun in. She's got straight, shoulder-length blonde hair, blue eyes, and, like the man, has a noticeable accent.
Do you have any other information?
Yes, the car they used was seen by 2 or 3 people. It's a blue or dark blue Ford Escort, and we have the registration number. And it's G595ERI. I'll say that again. It's G595ERI. Now, the car was stolen from Bishopstone just over a week ago, so if anyone has seen it in the last week, we would like to hear from them. We also know that the car's front left headlight was broken when it was stolen, and is still broken, we think.
So, you would like information from the public about the car?
Yes, and the people. We're appealing to anyone who thinks they may recognise the 2 robbers or know anything about the car. We've set up an incident room in Swindon, and the telephone number is 774529. So we would like people to ring us if they have any information. And of course, all calls will be dealt with in the strictest confidence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the number again, if you have any information, is 774529. And now back to the studio.
That is the end of part 2.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to part 3.
Part 3.
You will hear part of a talk about attending a science festival.
First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Now, I think nearly all of you have received confirmation of your school placements for next term, and as part of your activities, we will be asking you to take responsibility for promoting a school visit to the Norchester Science Festival. Of course, the head of science at your school will be aware of the festival and should have all the details of it. But all the heads of science at your schools will be looking to you to be the main organiser and motivator of a visit to the festival. They'll give you the documents you need. We hope that you will motivate pupils at your schools to take an interest in the festival. It runs for 3 days. There are day tickets and special 3-day tickets, and schools have the extra option of a 2-day ticket. We hope you will encourage your pupils to visit it on 1 or 2 days. But most important of all, we hope you will use the festival to generate a lively interest in science that will last all year round and provide the school with a lasting benefit. This will, with luck, lead to improved examination results in science subjects. And let's not forget, we hope your pupils will have a lot of fun too. Needless to say, your performance in achieving these aims will count towards your final exam grade at the end of the year. Now, let me just say a few words on why a science festival. Science is part of our everyday world in a way that is different now from before. Of course, we're used to having the benefit of scientific inventions. We are used to the aeroplane, the motor car, the space rocket, and so on. But now we live in a truly scientific age, which means one where inventions and improvements are matters of routine rather than occasional and unusual events. We have become a really scientific society. Yet we find that we are failing to interest and enthuse the young in this. Fewer young people are choosing to study science at school after the age of 16, and even fewer at university. As a result, we have fewer teachers coming into schools to teach science. And many science teachers are not teaching their specialism. For example, I know of several cases where maths is being taught by biologists and chemistry is being taught by physicists. We urgently need another 3,000 science teachers in England at least. That's why we look to you, the science teachers who are starting off your careers, to inject enthusiasm and wonder into the study of science, and we hope the Norchester Festival will help you to do this.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Now, enough of the background. What about the festival? There are 3 main venues where the festival events take place. These are the Millennium Library, the Town Hall, not the Town Hall itself but the Town Hall Conference Centre, and the Norchester Theatre. Now, when you are planning your visits, remember that many of the activities for younger pupils will be at the Millennium Library, and the secondary school pupils may find more to interest them in the Conference Centre. Now, just so that you have some immediate information, I'd like to mention a few of the events that are taking place this year. One event of special interest to people living in this area is called Waterworld. This is a clay model of the southeast of England, and the presenters show you the effects of rising sea levels as a result of climate change. They ask the audience to select the rise in sea level, for example 20 or 40 or 60 centimetres, and the model shows the places that would be flooded as a result. Watch out for your town. Does it sink or does it swim? Transport 2050 is about transport options for our towns in the future. A number of experts will introduce the topic, and then everyone at the event will have a chance to speak and give their views. Science in a Suitcase is a comedy act by 2 scientists who do crazy experiments and sing songs and play the clown to large audiences every afternoon. I'm particularly looking forward to that one, which should be entertaining. Ropes and Hangings is an interactive event which will be of interest to young people, in which, after experimenting with ropes and bricks, they build a real suspension bridge. That kind of hands-on activity is always really popular. And, appealing to a different audience, there is Paper and Time, in which some experts will be showing us the techniques they use for the conservation of ancient books and manuscripts. This will obviously not be for everybody, but it should be interesting just to see how they do it. Now, let's move on to tickets and transport to the festival.
That is the end of part 3.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turns to Part 4.
Part 4.
You will hear a woman giving a talk at a popular science convention. She is describing research into artificial gills designed to enable humans to breathe underwater. Now you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Now listen and answer questions 31 to 40.
In my talk today, I'll be exploring the idea of artificial gills. I'll start by introducing the concept, giving some background and so forth, and then I'll go on to explain the technological applications, including a short, very simple experiment I conducted. Starting with the background. As everyone knows, all living creatures need oxygen to live. Mammals take in oxygen from the atmosphere by using their lungs, and fishes take oxygen from water by means of their gills, which of course in most fishes are located either side of their head. But human beings have always dreamt of being able to swim underwater like the fishes, breathing without the help of oxygen tanks. I don't know whether any of you have done any scuba diving, but it's a real pain having to use all that equipment. You need special training, and it's generally agreed that tanks are too heavy and big to enable most people to move and work comfortably underwater. So scientists are trying a different tack. Rather than humans carrying an oxygen supply as they go underwater, wouldn't it be possible to extract oxygen in situ? That is, directly from the water while swimming. In the 1960s, the famous underwater explorer Jacques Cousteau, for example, predicted that one day surgery could be used to equip humans with gills. He believed our lungs could be bypassed and we would learn to live underwater just as naturally as we live on land. But of course, most of us would prefer not to go to such extremes. I've been looking at some fairly simple technologies developed to extract oxygen from water, ways to produce a simple, practical artificial gill enabling humans to live and breathe in water without harm. Now, how scientists and inventors went about this was to look at the way different animals handled this. Fairly obviously, they looked at the way fishes breathe, but also how they move down and float up to the surface using inflatable sacs called swim bladders. Scientists also looked at animals without gills, which use bubbles of air underwater, notably beetles. These insects contrive to stay underwater for long periods by breathing from this bubble, which they hold under their wing cases. By looking at these animal adaptations, inventors began to come up with their own artificial gills. Now, making a crude gill is actually rather easy, more straightforward. You take a watertight box, which is made of a material which is permeable to gas, that is, it allows it to pass through inwards and outwards. You then fill this with air, fix it to the diver's face, and go down underwater. But a crucial factor is that the diver has to keep the water moving so that water high in oxygen is always in contact with the gill, so he can't really stay still. And to maximize this contact, it's necessary for your gill to have a big surface area. Different gill designers have addressed this problem in different ways, but many choose to use a network or lattice arrangement of tiny tubes as part of their artificial gills. Then the diver is able to breathe in and out. Oxygen from the water passes through the outer walls of the gill and carbon dioxide is expelled. In a nutshell, that's how the artificial gill works. So, having read about these simple gill mechanisms, I decided to create my own. I followed the procedure I've just described, and it worked pretty well when I tried it out in the swimming pool. I lasted underwater for nearly 40 minutes. However, I've read about other people breathing through their gill for several hours. So the basic idea works well, but the real limitation is that these simple gills don't work as the diver descends to any great depth because the pressure builds and a whole different set of problems are caused by that. Research is being done into how these problems might be overcome, but that's another story, which has to be a subject of another talk. Despite this serious limitation, many people have high hopes for the artificial gill, and they think it might have applications beyond simply enabling an individual to stay underwater for a length of time. For example, the same technology might be used to provide oxygen for submarines, enabling them to stay submerged for months on end without resorting to potentially dangerous technologies such as nuclear power. Another idea is to use oxygen derived from the water as energy for fuel cells. These could power machinery underwater, such as robotic devices. So, in my view, this is an area of technology with great potential. Now, if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer. Yes, lady at the...
That is the end of part 4.
You now have half a minute to check your answers.